Is there anyone, anywhere in the world, with a bad thing to say about Ferrari? Ever since the very first car to bear the Ferrari name, the 125S, was built in 1947, the Italian marque has known little else aside success and brilliance. As a brand, Ferrari transcends automotive interest, with roots planted in irresistible Italian style and passion, all born from the man who started it all. The world owes much to Enzo Ferrari, whose spirit remains at the heart of everything manufactured in Maranello. What started off as a small Italian motor racing team that built sports cars has become the nucleus of the Italian automotive industry. Ferrari's history as a manufacturer of many of the world's greatest road and racing cars is unique, but with the first all-electric Ferrari set to arrive in 2026, the prancing horse is already charging into what we're sure will be an equally spectacular future. Now, trying to narrow down a list of great Ferraris was never likely to be an easy task. But before we get into it, don't forget to like and share this video, and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with everything going on here at Good Road and Racing. Okay, let's do this. Here are the 13 greatest Ferrari road cars of all time. There's only one place to start, isn't there? Forget Ferraris. Is the F40 the greatest car of all time? It's certainly up there as one of our favourites. It's significant for many reasons. It was conceived as a celebration of Ferrari's 40th anniversary, an encapsulation of Ferrari's substantial motorsport legacy within the body of a single road car. With a 2.9-litre twin-turbocharged V8 mounted in the middle and powering the rear wheels, at the time of its production between 1987 and 1992, the F40 was the fastest, most powerful, and most expensive Ferrari you could buy. But more than that, the F40 is an exhibition of purity. Put together like a Ferrari racing car from the 1960s, the experience of driving it was unlike anything else on the planet. The F40 is far from perfect, but there is nothing more special. Before the F40 came the Ferrari 288 GTO, a car that would have perhaps held that same reputation 40 years later, were it not for its illustrious successor. A homologation derivative of the 308 GTB, the 288 GTO is often considered the original Ferrari supercar. After the marque had first introduced turbocharging in the 208 GTB, the 288 featured a refined 2.9-litre twin-turbo V8 to meet FIA requirements. The engine was mounted longitudinally to accommodate a racing setup for the engine and transmission. Continuing the racier approach, the 288 GTO also took a more aggressive look with flared wheel arches and substantial aerodynamic additions to the bodywork. Producing 400 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, the GTO could accelerate from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 5 seconds, which for a supercar in 1984 was remarkable. Much of what we know as Ferrari today can be traced back to this car, and for that, we will be eternally grateful. Before all this nonsense with turbocharging though, Ferrari road cars were almost exclusively powered by 12 cylinders, most famously in the form of the Colombo V12, the first engine Ferrari developed in-house. If you think of early Ferrari, you think V12 mounted at the front, with 2 seats, and we think that the 250 GT short wheelbase might be the ultimate front-engine V12 Ferrari. That's not to say the 275, the 550, the 812 Superfast, or indeed any other version of the 250, the Lusso, the California Spider, or the Berlinetta are all that bad, but the 250 GT short wheelbase might be our favourite Ferrari of all. I keep saying that. Road-going versions of the 250 had been in production since 1953, and retained its original form through several variants until the short wheelbase was introduced in 1959, which simultaneously improved the handling and looks of Ferrari's big Grand Tourer. Only 176 were ever built. Many saw racing action, and we get to see some of them in regular action here at the Goodwood Revival, which is always a massive, massive treat. Fast forward a decade, and Ferrari had made massive progress with the Colombo V12. Capacity had increased from 3 litres to 4.4 litres. Output had risen by around 100 horsepower. And it was now being lowered into the 365 GTB4 Daytona. The Daytona name tag was not recognised until later, but but the 365 GTB4 signalled quite the shift in Ferrari design. Featuring a revolutionary Pininfarina designed body, it ditched the classic curves of its predecessors in favour of a bold new look. It's an iconic shape, one recently revisited by the Dodici Cilindri revealed in 2024. Performance was a step up too, and not just thanks to the more potent V12. In racing form, the Daytona took class victories at Le Mans in 1972, 73 and 74, but on the road it earned plaudits as one of the most comfortable cars in the world. It wasn't until the mid-1970s, in the wake of the Daytona, that Ferrari began to branch out from the V12 GT genome and begin a new lineage of mid-engine V8 sports cars. And then, it wasn't until the mid-1990s, apart from the two we've already mentioned, until it made one that we believe deserves a place on this list. A major aspect of the marked improvement of the F355 was the new 5-valve cylinder head that greatly improved the 3.5-litre V8's intake, resulting in vast performance gains. The thing revved to more than 8,000 RPM too, so it sounded absolutely sublime. We're celebrating the manual versions in particular here. The later 355 F1 was dogged by an innovative but ultimately undercooked F1 style paddle transmission. But with the 6-speed manual and that sonorous V8 in tow, the F355 was the car that got Ferrari back on track. Was the 360 the first modern Ferrari? Following in the footsteps of the F355, it was the car that carried the prancing horse into the 21st century, doing so with a clean slate approach that saw the development of a brand new chassis design and refreshed styling. The 360 did away with pop-up headlights and rounded off the hard edges of the 80s and 90s. It was lighter and faster than its predecessor, and that was especially true in the case of the Ferrari 360 Challenge Stradale. Fettled for the track in virtually every way, the Challenge Stradale gained 25 horsepower, took ceramic brakes from the Enzo, lost up to 110 kilos, and had its throttle response sharpened. The icing on the cake was the fitment of the Fiorano handling pack, and all in, these increments amounted to around 3.5 seconds in lap time around Ferrari's test track. With its 3.6-litre V8 now reaching beyond 8,500 RPM, the Challenge Stradale is a car that massages your soul into sweet delirium. Something Ferrari has always been very good at is retaining that sense of wonderment. The creation of cars that seem simply too good to be true, that strike chords that very few, if any, other cars can. And that's what we love so much about the 458 Speciale. By now it had been almost 10 years since the arrival of the Challenge Stradale, and while the F430 can very easily have been featured on this list, it didn't quite move the goalposts like the 458 did. It made use of a new F136 V8 first seen in the F430, but bumped the power up substantially to more than 600 horsepower and a red line in excess of 9,000 RPM. The F430's E-diff was also back, but now combined with additional torque optimization to greatly improve the 458 Speciale's handling. At the time, this was perhaps, from a purely technical perspective, the best car Ferrari had ever made. But don't say that too loudly, because the F50 might hear you. That the Ferrari Enzo, the car christened with the name of Mr. Ferrari himself, is not on this list is purely down to the effect the F50 has had on us. Its engine, a naturally aspirated 4.7-litre V12, was developed from the engine used in the Ferrari 641, a car that won Grand Prix in the hands of Alain Prost and Nigel Mansell. It was also later used in the 333 SP. That was bolted directly to a carbon tub, the first of its kind in a Ferrari road car. In our eyes, the F50 has always been unfairly overshadowed by the F40 as the iconic Ferrari of the 1990s, and yet it heralded the return of the V12 at the top of the pyramid. The F50 was far more exclusive than its predecessor too. Only 349 were ever built, and it remains the last mid-engined, manual V12 Ferrari, which gives this car a mystique befitting of the sound it makes. We've covered off a lot of very special Ferrari cars, but none can claim to be the definitive Ferrari. That was the intention behind LaFerrari. Its pedigree is obvious, when you consider it's the result of rigorous testing of the FXX prototype, but it's more than just a fast Ferrari. LaFerrari was the original hybrid car to come out of Maranello. The 6.3-litre V12 was linked to an F1-style KERS system that together delivered around 950 horsepower. That F1 connection continued with a carbon fibre monocoque designed by Rory Byrne, but LaFerrari went a whole lot further than that. Electronic stability and traction control combined with an EDIF and trick dampers made it a surprisingly accessible car to drive, which means, unlike the F40 or the F50, which are perhaps a tad primitive for actual public roads, LaFerrari is actually a car you'd enjoy driving from one end of the country to the other. The fact its replacement, the F80, is powered by a 3-litre twin-turbo V6 combined with 3 electric motors, we suspect LaFerrari might also be the final V12 engine member of Ferrari's Halo lineage. But let's not get down in the dumps. Here's something to cheer you up: the Ferrari Testarossa. A true icon of the 1980s, it perhaps best showcases what the prancing horse is all about. It's a mid-engine 2-seater sports car powered by an absolutely astonishing 4.9-litre flat 12, cooled by huge vents hewn into the sides of the bodywork. It was bold, it was excessive, it was brilliant. Enzo Ferrari had finally agreed to adopt the mid-engine configuration a decade earlier with the Berlinetta Boxster, but the Testarossa was the result of years of development, from the 365 GT4 BB, the 512 BB, and finally the 512 BBi. It was larger in all directions, which made it more comfortable and more practical, while its popularity among A-list clientele made it a symbol of pop culture through the late 1980s. While it might not be the best in terms of outright performance, there's no questioning the Testarossa's legendary status. We'll stick with 12 cylinders, but we'll put them back at the front now for a nice long look at arguably the most beautiful car on this list. The Ferrari 275 was always going to have a tough time overcoming its predecessor. The 250 was such a success both on the road and in competition that there really was no hope for whatever came next. Even a couple of class victories at Le Mans in 1965 and 66 were not enough to forge a legacy for the 275. But we don't care, because it's simply stunning. We're looking particularly at the GTB Series 2 here, with the long nose sculpted by Pininfarina, forging perfect proportions and a wonderful reminder that car design needn't be complicated. Those looks didn't quite make it down to the 275's great-great-great-great-grandchild, but there's certainly a passing resemblance. The 812 Superfast was introduced in 2017, and there was no mistaking that long bonnet and drooping nose. This was the latest front-engine V12 Grand Tourer from Maranello. The 330, the 365, the 550, the 599 and the F12 had all carried the torch with pride, but none had quite honoured the family name quite like the 812. In many ways, the 812 was simply finishing what the F12 had started. The naturally aspirated V12 had grown to 6.5 litres, and with an output of 800 horsepower, had become the most powerful engine of its kind ever made. That alone was enough to make this car feel inherently special, but then you take into account the marked improvements in aerodynamic efficiency, and suddenly the performance heads into another stratosphere. 0 to 62 took just 2.9 seconds, but better than all of that was that the 812 was available in convertible GTS form. It was the first time Ferrari had offered a convertible V12 GT since the 365 GTS, way back in 1970. Good grief, was it worth the wait? So, have we saved the best till last? Our hearts say no, but our heads, well... The 296 GTB is without a doubt one of the most spectacular Ferraris ever in terms of pure engineering brilliance. More so than any other era, the 2020s have proven that the factory in Maranello still represents the pinnacle of automotive development. But even as the SF90 and, yes, the Purosangue are busy delivering ludicrous levels of performance, it's the 296 that sends our jaws dropping more than anything else. It would be oh so easy to turn your nose up at a mere 6 cylinders and walk the other way, but you'd be missing out on probably the greatest driving experience of your life if you did. The 296 was Ferrari's first ever plug-in hybrid model. That 3-litre twin-turbocharged V6 combines with an electric motor to produce 830 horsepower, but with pin-sharp power delivery, it accelerates like no other Ferrari ever has. That, together with an exquisite balance and goosebump-inducing handling, makes the 296 a mesmerising car to drive, both on the road and on a racetrack. And that's it, our roundup of the greatest Ferraris of all time. As we said at the start, this was never going to be an easy task, and we're sure you'll have your own ideas as to what should have made it onto this list. What's certain is that Ferrari has produced many of the world's most sensational cars, and all evidence suggests that that's set to continue long into the future. Give us your thoughts down in the comments, and as ever, don't forget to like and share this video, and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with everything going on here at Goodwood Road & Racing.